Welcome back to our podcast, Talking Aged Care. I'm joined by Lisa Owen and Michael Page to discuss the fantastic initiative Open the Doors 2030. Thank you both for being here in different time zones as well. And if you could please introduce yourselves to our community, to our guests, and just explain a bit about yourself and the initiative.
Lisa, do you want to go first?
I can go first if you want. My name's Lisa Rogers Owen. I'm a registered mental health nurse. I'm trained in the UK quite a long time ago now, and always worked in older people's mental health and always worked in the field of dementia. So that's across clinical education, training, the whole kit and caboodle already, private and public sectors. So kind of got a lot of experience in the field, and obviously in the UK and obviously in New Zealand as well. So that's kind of my background.
Yeah, and I'm also from the UK. So I've been a registered nurse for 30 years, and I've been in Australia probably about 18 years, and actually mainly in critical care nursing. And my background was in change management, educational research, and critical care. But probably the last 8 years, I've been involved more in aged care and specifically dementia education. I guess I'd say I was an influencer, a change manager, infiltrator into the aged care system, trying to get some changes moving. But again, clinical education. I've been involved with Dementia Training Australia and other organisations in the dementia field. And currently, I guess my main background is in learning and development. So I'm a learning development specialist professional. And my current role is as clinical educator for a large organisation in South Australia called Uniting Communities. But I also do some consultative work, advisory work, primarily on dementia for some other organisations.
Thanks, Michael. Thanks, Lisa. I'm also from the UK. I think we've planned that quite well. Hopefully, we'll get some subscribers from the UK as well. But in terms of both of your careers and speaking as a clinician, we can all agree that dementia, the way that we're looking after residents who have dementia, we can do better, right? We can definitely do better. I liken back, and it tells my age here, 37 this year. I remember when I was in university studying, I studied quite early, got a scholarship to study at 16. Year one, we were told to call them patients. Year two, it went to residents. And year three was service users. And that was just amazing in those 3 years. But I think what sort of struck a chord with the initiative Open the Doors 2030, and Lisa, you would know this, but we had managed a family business, a portfolio of aged care homes, but very different. We had 2 nursing homes that were 13, 40 bedded. They were nursing homes. But then we moved to a household model. So the 5 homes we had a maximum of 5 residents. And it was amazing because that was person-centered care. Somebody was used to getting up at 4 in the morning. They woke up at 4 in the morning. Somebody wanted to wake up at 2 o'clock in the afternoon to have their breakfast there. We were able to do that. But I think the point that I want to talk about, Lisa, on this was the DOLS, Declaration of Liberty Safeguarding. And, we weren't allowed to have the doors locked. It was open. And I was pretty amazed when I came to Australia and I heard of these sort of DSUs, MSUs, but whatever it is, it's a locked ward. And I just wanted to get your thoughts on, I guess, the model of care in the UK, and also how things are operating in New Zealand when it comes down to dementia care residents.
I think probably very similar to Australia. I think in New Zealand, I don't think we're too dissimilar in terms of how we are really. I think there are some small movements, but I think that's usually maybe the villages. Like there's a care village open not far from me, and there's another one I was told opening in the South Island. So I guess they're the nearest thing, because I think there's also to do with funding models. It's all to do with kind of other logistics as well, that people are funded for certain levels of care, and then you go into those places where they facilitate that level of care. There is a bit of a movement recently around they call them swing beds. So if you are a rest home hospital, they provide a bed that you can be either hospital or rest home level of care. So I guess that's really a good example of aging in place, for want of another term that we've used for a long time. that actually people don't have to move to another room and another part of the facility to be able to stay where they are. But in terms of dementia care, we're still very much in that there's a unit and it's locked and it's in a certain part of the facility, and there's quite a lot of reluctance for that to move. But we did also have the Ombudsman come a few years ago, and now we've got OPCAT, so it's around Prevention of Cruelty Act, and so actually they do inspections now into facilities of any kind of facility where people are, I guess, contained, for want of another word. So actually that came across a few years ago, which is quite interesting, and they do quite a lot of spot visits. And there's also a bit of a challenge going on in terms of the law, in terms of EPOAs and triple PRs, which will obviously then have an impact as well. So I think there's changes coming, but it's very slow change, and I think that's where we all get frustrated, the slowness of change.
That's right. I all wish it was higher to the next year or the next change of government. But no, thanks, Lisa, for explaining that. In terms of opening the doors 2030, it's not just a movement, it's a human rights issue, right?
Yeah, I think it is. I think you're just listening to Lisa. In Australia, I don't think much has changed in the last 30 years, and probably it's the same in the UK. We tend to borrow a lot from the UK, some good and some not great. Star ratings, the Commission, the whole regulation of aged care in Australia has effectively been plagiarised from the UK system, which is now being criticised as not working. I think we had a kick up the backside with Oakden, which was in South Australia, which in Australia sort of focused the mind on how appalling aged care was. And the response to that, the Royal Commission, has been a complete and utter failure, really. It's just basically sticking a band-aid over the situation, and I don't think dementia care, we have a lot of knowledge, and that's what OTD is all about. I think we have a lot of knowledge globally about what best practice dementia could be or should be, and we're a million miles away from it still. We're very much in Australia looking back to what was done 20 or 30 years ago, and setting up things like the Dutch dementia villages as being best practice, when they probably were at the time, but they're definitely not now. And we're still, like you said, a human rights issue. I think it is a human rights issue that we're herding people together based on diagnosis. We don't have osteoporosis wings. We don't have heart failure units in aged care, but we have dementia units where effectively we sweep the problem under the carpet and shut the door. And I don't think MSUs have any part to play in dementia care. And you say DSUs to me is dementia segregation unit. That's all it is. It's a place to lock the doors and try to manage behaviors or control behaviors, which is completely 180 degrees away from what we actually should be doing, which is create an environment and a way of life that is conducive with people having quality of life and maintaining the strengths that they still have in dementia up until death, and not just putting people together and exacerbating and creating the distress which causes what we loosely call behaviors, and then we manage those behaviors often with restraint and often with chemical restraint, and we put people together. It's okay for people with dementia to punch each other and to sexually abuse each other in aged care. How is that not a human rights issue? So I think Open the Doors came about. The sort of reason was Nicole Smith and the work that Community Home Australia have done, which is very similar to the model you talked about, Mark, which is taking some of the recommendations from the Royal Commission, most of which have not been mandated and most of which have not been taken up by the government, but Community Home Australia has, and that is to provide innovative care models and small-scale living, which is seen to be more conducive to quality of life for people with dementia and negates the need to lock doors and manage behaviours.
No, thanks, Mark. And sorry, Lisa. Go.
I was just going to say, you were talking about earlier on that you had sort of places where there's only 5 people living there, and I think there is. I mean, in New Zealand, there's you can have up to 20 people living in one facility. And I'm like, in no other time in your life do you live with 19 complete strangers. Never mind 19 complete strangers who are all navigating living with dementia into that in a strange place with strange people and environments that don't make sense. So I think it's what you also see is actually that's not a natural way to live. And I say live in a loose term because actually some people are just existing, unfortunately. And I think that's the thing around that, challenging that. So actually we just put people in a space, whereas actually we should be looking about what that space means for that person and how we can make it conducive that people don't want to leave. And I guess that's what Michael was saying is we want to, if you've got the right space and the right approach and the right resources, people don't want to go. It's like anybody, we're all going to want to leave if we're in a place we don't feel safe or welcomed or we've got any purpose. So
that's absolutely right. But here in Australia, a 20 or 30 bed residential aged care home, there are very few that exist. The norm is 100, maybe 150. I think there are some that are 200. A few years ago, a previous organisation, I won an ARIA grant to look at, can you retrofit large aged care homes to provide small scale living? And I left that organisation, and I don't know what the outcome of that was, because I don't think we're going to be knocking down those big hotel-like 150-bed homes anytime soon. So can you actually redesign them or design them in some way that makes it at least livable, as opposed to, as you say, living with 20 people is not natural, and living in a care farm, as some people have labelled them, with 150 other people is just, there's absolutely no chance that however good your teams are going to provide true person-centered support for 150 people at the same time.
No, I agree, Michael. Like, you're also, critical care trained. For example, when it comes down to ICU, you're often 1-to-1 or 1-to-2, depending if someone's on a ventilator, and based on the acuity of needs and providing personalised care. I think it's quite disrespectful in terms of the way that we perceive the needs and diagnosis of people in aged care, and we seem like they may have different types of Alzheimer's disease, Huntington's, for example. But like you said, we just group them all together and expect it to be okay that they're in a DSU or a locked ward. And there's been peer-reviewed clinical research and data, and I've seen it firsthand as a facility manager, when we've taken someone who would normally be in a DSU or an MSU, we put them into an integrated living space, and they're having meaningful conversations. We call it in the UK the mini mental state examination, but people are saying to them, I'm sure what the time is, or what day is it today? And they're having those conversations. They're being orientated to time, date, and place. They're having normal conversations, and actually they live longer and better lives. It frustrates me that it's not rocket science, yet we seem to layer it and overcomplicate it. And at the end of the day, these poor residents are not getting the optimized quality of life they deserve in their final years.
I think there's a few things at play. I think there's a thing about risk and about being risk adverse. And I think about how that gets reported. And, that stops us from, it's that fear. I think there's a lot of fear. I think when I talk about risk in terms of people fearful, and I've seen that on all kinds of levels, organizational levels and individual levels of like, we can't allow that person to make a drink. It's like, well, I don't understand why, and around. So we
can't do it. That's right. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. And I'm like, oh, well, of course you can. They're quite capable. They've been making a drink for the last 70 years of their life. Chances are they're probably going to be okay. So there's really kind of lots of complexities around that kind of thing, I think, which then, and also what gets reported and what contracts are in place. So I think it becomes a system issue, doesn't it? So it comes from the top about how things are funded, goes down to organisational risk, then it goes down to staff that work in that space. And if you challenge the norm or you go against the organisation, so to speak, what does that mean? And we know a lot of people leave because they get disillusioned. If you try to challenge the system, it gets hard. It gets really hard to challenge. So people leave. And then consequently, the people who are there, living there every day, they're the people who face consequences of that because they don't get a chance to experience just everyday life.
Yeah, no, that's right. So I think, especially with us at Pitman Holdings, we specialize in education, advice, and recruitment. I'm the partner for recruitment, but I feel sorry for quite a few candidates that we speak to. If you look at their resumes, it looks like they can't stay in a place 3 months, 4 months, or a year. The reality is, some of those people, more often than not, so it's not a one-time fits-all solution. The reason why they can't stay there is because their moral compass won't allow them to stay there. We've had very confidential discussions, and being a clinician myself, and they'll tell me things like, Mark, my regional manager has said, no, that's not a SERS, because discretion previous to SERS, discretion not to report the resident has dementia, and things are just swept under the carpet, and they said, I can't do it, and that's why, explain that. So, I think in terms of we can do better in terms of educating our staff and in terms of what we should do and how we should look after residents with dementia. But I think in terms of at a federal level, there needs to be something in place. There needs to be something in place. It just amazes me that despite all of those millions of dollars, and I can understand the motive, right, especially working in the sector, whilst it's good that the Royal Commission into aged care was done, great, that was done, but years on, and historically speaking, some Royal Commissions can take 5 years when you're mandated, and they're just being passed the buck. Let's talk about that next year. Let's table that for the next government. Let's keep going. And ultimately, all these millions of dollars have sort of, in a way, fallen to the wayside. So I do understand, how working in the sector can be emotive and upset. But I also do understand that the government need to be realistic, that when they have recommendations that they're going to enforce them, that it needs to add up, the commerce needs to add up. It always comes back to workforce, not necessarily more workforce. Yes, that's one of the issues, but a more equipped and skilled and resource workforce that have the knowledge. So I think it's definitely sort of threefold in that respect. But the question I wanted to ask you is, we talked about this, MSUs, DSUs, but do you think aged care providers will ever allow sort of integrated living spaces and they will remove these spaces?
Will allow, that's the question. And I think what Lisa was saying, we're in a fear culture, and the Royal Commission, it was an unintended consequence, but the Commission now is just, the regulator is just putting fear into organisations. And I've worked with CEOs who really want innovative dementia support. They really want it. But they have an executive below them that are so fearful of unmet commission. And compliance is not quality. Compliance is merely the minimal accepted standard to continue receiving funding. It's not a high benchmark. And yet many aged care providers are failing to achieve that. So I think, you mentioned it, you have spoken to people who have a moral compass. These are the people we should be employing and supporting and getting out of their way. But what's happening now is we're recruiting people, and then we're telling them, don't write this in the notes, don't do this. It's a fear game. And people are going into aged care with a inherent purpose that they want to help people on a daily basis, and that's being crushed out of them. And there are people who've been in aged care, working in aged care for 30 or 40 years, who are just giving up because they don't believe that they can actually have relationships with residents and make a difference anymore. And it's because we are, and Dementia Australia have put this in their response to the Royal Commission. One of the consequences of the current system is the intention was to create innovation. There's very little innovation now because people are fearful of failure, and we've just put layers. Many organisations just put layers and layers of compliance, governance, advisors, business partners, whatever you want to call them, instead of investing at the root of, let's recruit people with that moral compass. let's provide, as David Sheard said at one of our OTD meetings, going back to Kitwood, a moral education. We can teach anyone about dementia whenever we need to, or in their Cert 3 or whatever qualification, that information can be provided. What we actually need to do is provide the environment for our staff that they enjoy what they're doing, they feel a purpose, and they can build relationships with residents. And then all the other good stuff will happen, rather than continue to not invest. And I don't believe you need one-to-one staffing in the dementia area at all, but you definitely need better staffing, and you definitely need not only better educated and trained people, but also teams. We invest in individual learning, not team learning and problem solving. And we've seen it. Community Homes Australia does it. I've done it. I've opened the doors in aged care providers, and it's worked because we've put the teams first. We've invested in the teams. We've created environments where they want to come to work. They feel empowered that they can do what they want to do without fear of repercussions from senior managers who are constantly trying to hit KPIs, be them financial for return on investment, or clinical indicators, or fear of the commission. We've got everything. In my view, we've got it completely back to front. We should be investing at I shouldn't say the word on the floor, but in the people who are actually looking after residents.
Yeah.
It goes back to what Tom Kitwood said around person-centered care. You can't expect people to provide person-centered care unless they're treated in a person-centered way. Fundamentally, that's what it comes down to. So if we don't invest and treat staff the way, then how do we expect people to turn up for work every day to do that and support people who are living with dementia? So it's kind of really comes back to that core again of actually, if they're in a fear-based system and they're fear-based organization, then that's what we're going to get. People fearful or are going to leave, or just going to conform to whatever that norm is. And unfortunately, that's what happens, isn't it? We see that happen quite a lot. So I was talking to somebody last week about actually, if you want to implement something, it's a whole systems change. You can't just go in and say, we want to do this. You have to look at everything around that. And I guess that's the complexity. And like Michael and I talked about briefly last week, it's just around actually the time and that takes. Most people are just getting through their day, just doing what they can, the best they can with limited resources. And I don't think it is, like Michael said, a one-on-one. I think it's around just actually just an emphasis on what's important, probably more, I would say, in terms of actually, does it matter if the beds are made? Not really. But does it matter that somebody's been outside and been in the garden for an hour, having a great time? Yeah. So it's around flipping around what's important, I think, and our systems don't necessarily support or enable that.
No, I agree. I think, well said, Lisa. I think in terms of, we are very risk averse, super risk averse, to the point that it's risk assessments for everything. But I think it's, again, that fear of scrutiny, it's the fear of loss, it's the fear, providers, to be fair to them, and like you said, Mike, yes, they want to do the right thing, but unfortunately, everyone's not on the same page. The regulators aren't there. Because if we look at this from a business perspective, the best businesses in the world fail fast, fail quick, they learn, they develop, they come back out, version 2. They try and fail internally before they go to market with a product or service. But the ones who recognize, how can we improve an experience? You book in a holiday, how can we improve that experience? Take away some moving parts, streamline it. But because that's the Royal Commission, one really bad thing that the Royal Commission did was the glamorizing of the mistakes, and we all saw the four corners. And to sort of paint that and to have that televised nationally and paint all the providers with the same brush was wrong. And there are some providers doing some fantastic things, and Community Homes Australia doing a fantastic thing. I will say, I think it's great what they're doing in terms of the model of care, the staff, how they're paying above award. But I also do say that they are funded by the NDIS, different to aged care, residential aged care. So I must make that point. But I have a lot of respect for the way that Rodney and Nicole are doing things, and they are setting the standard for how people should be treated, and how people deserve to be treated. Even to the point where what I really like is, I remember reaching out to Rodney years ago, saying I'd love to come and visit the home community home to Australia. And his response didn't upset me. It actually made me happy. He goes, "Oh, Mark, I'd love to tour you, but it's someone's home. So we have to respect the fact it's their home." And it's the same with other people. So it's that mindset. I think in terms of educate providers now, because, and you know this as well, Michael, especially in Australia with the business from the commission, when the commission turn up on the door, providers are scared of this. So as you've got the care managers crying in the corners, and it's a real sort of stressful time. I don't think I've ever worked in the human service industry, especially in Australia, that when the regulator comes, it breeds fear into people. It shouldn't be the case. No other industry do you have where people consider working in a different career, or they are that stressed. Like, there should be a way to allow, and like you said, to harness innovation and learnings. But as Lisa said rightly so, because we're so risk adverse, somebody comes in, told them to burn themselves, that's a form, that's an incident form, that's a follow-up with the GP, and so on and so on. So will make it for themselves. We will de-skill them. So I guess, in terms of the way that the lay of the land, I guess, in aged care, it's not assisted to best practice in that respect.
No, and it's flippant for me to say, but I've never worried about the commission coming, and I've justified the model that I've worked with, and that's what Community Home Australia do. And I think OTD, the important thing of OTD, is we're a community of practice that's a psychologically safe space for lots of those people who are trying to do it alone often, who are pushing, literally trying to push against a closed door, and are struggling in that environment. It's simplistic to say, but when you do invest, and it does take an investment, and it's very difficult, you'll understand this from a clinical education point of view, to always have to prove there's a return on investment. Well, these are human lives, and there's still a fear in the dementia space. And I worked with a provider that had to leave because they had a sentinel event many years ago, and their learnings from that is build the fences higher, have a belt and braces to use it. So they will never have an outlook to even consider opening the doors. So I think Open the Doors, OTD itself, is a global initiative, which, as Lisa said, people are time poor, they're operational, their heads are down doing all those things they need to do. Much of it unnecessary and tick boxing because of the overregulation. But we bring together thought leaders from around the world, innovators from around the world, and distill or synthesize the current best practice and put that out there. And what we aim to do over the next months and years is to support people in change management and have those conversations to talk about return on investment, but also emotionally intelligent return on investment is reputation and actually doing the right thing. And as far as I'm concerned, if you can't attempt to provide something near quality of life in these so-called units, you shouldn't be allowed to operate them. And I don't think people should be allowed to operate memory support units unless they can prove what memory support they're actually providing and what training and level of emotional intelligence their teams are using. So I think for me, OTD is about trying to just maybe gradually, but we're all fairly impatient because we've been in the sector for a long time and nothing seems to be changing, and everyone says change takes a long time. That's just the fob off. We need change yesterday, and if we don't start moving in the right direction, we'll continue to have what we've had before. So I think it's a change of mindset to actually understand dementia better, and it's not just learning about what dementia is and how to respond once someone is distressed. It's about putting in whatever we can and helping people to put in place whatever they can to stop people being distressed in the first place, and normalize life and provide active, meaningful lives, and involve people living with dementia themselves in that conversation, not just dictate from above, from knowledge we were taught 20 or 30 years ago.
That's right. That's right. And I want to ask this question, and it is a big question, but do you think that aged care providers are breaching the United Nations Human Rights Charter?
I'm not that familiar with the Charter to say yes or no, but I think, as I said before, it's pretty intuitive that if you're locked into a place and you're not allowed to go out without someone else letting you out, that sounds like a breach of human rights to me. If you're in an environment where someone may be aggressive and may assault you or sexually assault you, and that's just accepted as being, it's a SIRS and will safeguard after the event, then that's probably a human rights breach as far as I'm concerned. What would your view on that be?
Yeah, no, likewise, Michael, and I don't know the United Nations Human Rights Charter verbatim, but correct. It's not right. I think I remember going into an aged care facility when I was working in quality, looking after a portfolio of 7 homes, and they had the code to exit the building, keypad. So instead of they had the digits 4, 3, 2, 1, it had it in different colours, the actual word. And that was even hard for me to pick up. So they sort of, dodged around the way of doing that, and then the response is it's not a, environmental restraint because the code's there, but it's not really appropriate.
That was very big in the UK a long time ago. I remember distinctly that was you had to legally put a code so people could come and go free will. You couldn't actually do it. It was a really interesting time, wasn't it? In the changes to the Mental Health Act, there was lots of legalities a long time ago around actually about people in long stay wards under no legal framework whatsoever. I remember, and there was lots of reforms and changes. I guess it's about challenging. I guess it's that line that comes back against that risk, doesn't it? Do we? I think anybody would say that anybody who's contained somewhere against their will is definitely a concern against human rights. But I guess that's where what alternatives are there available? And I guess that's the thing about OTD is actually we know there's people doing amazing work all around the world, amazing innovative practice and work, and are doing this, and they're opening the doors and they're doing it differently. So actually it's about how can we all learn to do something differently, because like we all know, we've all been around long enough to realise actually we're doing the same but different but the same. Yeah, and so what we do is a model comes in, it goes out, something happens, the funder comes, it changes. In New Zealand, we've got a whole reform of our health system, like literally changing government, changing health system. What part of the wheel's going to be reinvented, what's going to change, but at the end of the day, there's still people there who need support and help every single day. But where does that go? So I think the thing about OTD is actually we can start to, hopefully people won't leave, maybe they'll start to get some enthusiasm and ideas from other places where they can keep going to work and making those small changes, because I think that's all we can do in some cases at the moment. It's just those small things can make a difference until the bigger things catch up.
So I think locked units like we have now will be banned eventually, and I think OTD has accepted that for a lot of people change is going to be gradual. So that's why it's by 2030. We're setting a realistic lead up to that. But we have members from across the globe, and we have a lot of members, and there's heard from a lot of people from America where risk is even bigger an issue, particularly in litigation, and they have been able to open the doors, and probably that's been a driver for that, because the risk of breaching human rights. And I've had conversations on LinkedIn with people who've come to OTD meetings or have heard about them and said, look, I just want to put a counter view. I don't think we can do this because we can't keep those people safe and they will go out on the roads or something bad will happen. And what I'm explaining is we're not saying just go into work tomorrow and say we're opening all the doors. That's not realistic. We need to put circumstances in place first, and we can as I said, the knowledge is there. It's not rocket science, and it's not actually hard to do. And when you do it, you create a better work environment, employee value proposition, and it's actually, I can't prove financially the return on investment, but there's less resources, there's fewer SIRS, there's fewer incidents, there's fewer, less use of medication. So what they're saying is, and they're agreeing, they're saying, we like what you're saying and we would like that for our residents, but we can't do it. But always the we can't do it comes down to the existing system that they have within their organization. So again, it comes down to a true commitment from the top that we want to do this. And instead of listening to, with all due respect to their own internal staff, we need a learning culture. And this is what OTD is as well, is a learning culture where you scan what's going out, same as we did with COVID. We don't understand this thing. Let's put it out to the global thought leaders, tell us what we need to do, and then try and implement it in a context that suits you. We don't do that at the moment in aged care. And I'm sure it's global, but certainly in Australia, we don't share information enough between organisations. And that's what OTD very much is. Everyone's completely egoless and free with their information to say, hey, I do this, or this worked well or didn't work well. Take what you like from that and please do plagiarize it, or it's not even plagiarizing, just please use it if it helps. And we need more of that across the industry as a whole, I think.
That's right, Michael. Well, very well said. I think, especially aged care providers, speaking here in Australia, very rarely will there be sharing of knowledge in terms of specific incidents. Obviously, allowing for data protection, but I think everyone's always trying to one up the other. How can we be better at what we do and what we do here? I think even the question of dignity of risk, and obviously I'm not saying this as a whole for the staff here, but when you do education class and you ask care staff what their understanding of dignity of risk is until they're told, and they default to privacy and dignity. And then you wait for them to obviously finish and explain to them the difference. But in terms of dignity of risk, do you think, speaking, I guess, here in Australia, keen to your thoughts as well, Lisa, that it's just a tick box, or providers actually allow people to live the life they want to, or have normal food and assess this being moist, for example?
I can speak from a New Zealand context. I guess the Royal Commission is very much Australian based, and I kind of have some ideas and but I can't really speak to that. But dignity at risk is kind of one of my passion things, topics, I guess, which is how I ended up getting embroiled in OTD, to be honest, because I made a comment and Nicole met me, and then before I knew it, I was on this journey. But risk is it's really interesting. We talk about, I talk a lot about positive risk taking. Dignity of risk, very similar kind of thing. So I think it's around, for me, it's just been really open around that. So I think what we do is we tend to hide a lot of things, so we don't do it because we're so scared. But actually, if we put things on the table, then actually it opens up lots of discussions and lots of debates and lots of conversations. And about actually, often I'll be saying, well, why can't you do that? And they'll be like, oh, just because you can't. But actually, people have got no really good reason. It's just become that fear culture. So I think for me, it's around just having really good conversations around, well, I'm a great believer, what's the worst that can happen? What's the best that can happen? What could that look like? And then do a bit of a scale. I have this kind of scale in my head around, where does that sit? If the risks are really high, then what can we do to mitigate them? How can we navigate them? What does that look like? A cup of tea, I wouldn't really probably hit my radar at all, probably for most people. But, jumping out of a plane, I might have a bit more of a conversation around the logistics and how that's going to work. But everything's achievable. But I think everybody's got so used to saying no and so fearful. But also that I have this thing about the word care and carers. It's become this bit of a bugbear in my world recently, around actually people take that role too literally. So my job is to care for you. My job is to do everything for you. My job is to care. So actually that means I'm going to stop you from doing anything I see as potentially dangerous on any level, in any shape or form. So I'm going to wrap you in cotton wool and I'm just going to disable you quite quickly because I'm going to look after you. But then actually, then for me, that becomes that risk to that person's well-being. So actually the person what about that person that, you just disabled quite quickly and just said, well, you've got no meaning, you've got no purpose. What for me, what's the point in getting up in the morning? So I think with the risk drives people to care too much. And I don't mean care, we should care for people. I mean in terms of do things for people or over care in terms of disabling and taking over. It becomes a bit of a complex dance. So I think for me is around understanding that actually your job is to enable and support, and actually, we're going to minimize risk because we do every day. We all do. We get out of bed in the morning, we think this is not a good idea. Perhaps we'll do something else. And so actually just our job is just to enable us to have spaces where people can just engage in things, and then we kind of think, well, what's the worst that can happen? And we'll cross that bridge when we get to it, because we're so fearful we don't enable people to do anything. And I won't use the word allow because I hate the word allow, but we don't enable people to do anything. So, but for that person, could you imagine just sitting there and like nobody ever says you can get your own cup of tea, or you can even just go in the garden and have a walk? It's really so for me, it's about that really open discussions and around actually everybody signs. If anybody needs to sign, the person can sign, their family can sign, the staff, or everybody just gets on board and just says this is how we roll. And I think for that piece, as part of Open the Doors, is literally about actually just we all just get on board and accept this is a person living their best life. And if that person living their best life means that person trips over, then actually they've lived their best life. And the alternative is they do nothing and they shrivel up to nothing. So it's kind of really that dignity of risk for me is a really quite a controversial space, that because we're so governed a bit like Australia, probably around contractual agreements and how you report and what you report on, we've become so scared to do anything. But actually what we forget is there's a person here just trying to live their best life, and we're not enabling that to happen. So I guess dignity of risk is a big thing really, and staff. And I think we've talked about staff a few times in education, is actually just being like part of your job is just to obviously minimize risk, because that's a sensible thing. But actually I spoke with Gwenda Darling, who was part of our group for a while, and she flipped me on my head around that. She said, I can't identify my risks sometimes, so actually I just want you to support me to be able to identify what I need to be able to do. And I thought it was a great different perspective as well around everybody needs something slightly different to be able to navigate that. And so we should be looking about what do that person need at that moment to be able to navigate that, and not get so wrapped up in the whole, I have to do an incident report if this happens, I have to do this, I have to do 27 assessments before you can even walk out the door, I have to make sure this is in place. And I think it's that over-regulation is we just get so caught up in that process rather than the person.
No, thanks, Lisa. That's really great insight, and also like the way that you actually reframed into risk to positive risk taking, and actually you just stripped it down there, to our viewers and some who aren't in the sector or age care, that we wake up every day and you are going for a run in the morning, and instead of going on the path, instead of I live, I might try and go down some bush area, and that's a risk that we're taking. Should I have done that or should I have not? Don't ever run with a Siberian Husky. That's not a good risk to take. But they tend to want to do what they want. But I think the question I wanted to ask you, and removing, I guess, the landscape here in Australia and speaking globally, clinical documentation. I know that we can improve upon it, and actually, when I was working in quality, it actually makes you reflect on your own practice. I was like, why do I not know this well? And what I wanted to say is, we often use the words, and I've often seen the words. For example, resident was aggressive, reassured other resident, redirected said resident. And it's only when you think about it, it's like you only ever use redirect if there's traffic issues, not to describe people. But the question I want to ask is, how could we, as clinicians, improve our own clinical documentation?
It's a good question. Interesting enough, OTD has monthly meetings where we tend to have guest speakers, and in between that, every 2 weeks, we have a thing called Keys to the Doors. And the next one is on language, and language is important, and documentation language is important. If we're talking about clinical documentation, I've had these conversations, and I got into a very long discussion with a group of nurses once, and it was just about, what does compliant mean? Like, you're writing a resident was non-compliant with something, or resistive to care is another one. What are the words that are really not helpful? Now, we have a lot of Dementia Australia, Dementia Training Australia, and other organisations around the world will have a list of language that has kind of become outdated or unhelpful, focused on dementia. But there's those broad ones that nurses have been trained to write this, and continue, to be told, don't write this, write as little as possible, don't write your clinical thoughts, write these phrases and stay away from these phrases because the commission will jump on that. So again, fear-based culture. But again, it's around the mindset of, in my view, we're all nurses, and I'm not, with all due respect to nurses, we're not necessarily the experts in dementia support. We don't spend most of our time with the residents like cleaners do, or the maintenance people do, let alone care workers. So I think it's an education thing. It's taking them on a journey thing of, we have to sort of take the nursing hat off and say, your interactions with people with dementia are the same as everyone else. It's about you providing human interaction with someone. So when you're using redirect, it's a mindset thing to say you are in control of that person, and if they're non-compliant, it means they're not doing what you tell them to do. That's not person-centered support. Person-centered comes from, and as Lisa mentioned with dignity of risk, you've got to involve the person, otherwise it's not person-centered support. So what do they want, and what are they? So using words like they're allowed to, or they're not allowed to, or we redirected them, which basically means we stopped them doing what they wanted to do, and made them do what we wanted them to do. So it's not just the language. Language is powerful and important. And if you are writing those terms, it's not just about stopping writing them. It's about having an understanding or a mindset that I've actually probably been doing this stuff not as optimally, but since my training, whether that was last year or 20 years ago. And things have moved on in dementia support. And as I say, OTD is saying, what most of us understand about best practice dementia care is kind of outdated now. We need to look at what we should be doing in the next 5 years, not what was okay 25 years ago. So I think it's part of that education process, but education for everyone. Everyone who interacts with a person with dementia should have the same or some foundation understanding, not only of what is dementia, but how do I support that person and support their quality of life.
Can I just, language is a bugbear of mine, probably very similar to Michael, around the allow compliance and things. Aggressive is my ultimate bugbear, probably most of this. Mary was aggressive, and I often say, I don't know what you mean by that. And then people look at me like, are you stupid? Why do you not know what I mean by being aggressive? And I'm like, well, I can be aggressive, but I don't know what that means. There's a context, there's a story, there's something that's happening. So actually, you can't just write a one word of this person's aggressive or non-compliant or difficult or anything. I think what we do is we lose the narrative. People don't write the narrative. And then also, I find that often people don't understand. I have this saying that as staff, we've got the ability to put fuel on the fire or put the fire out. So actually, every interaction, we've got the ability to do either or. So we can either literally make it worse, or we can actually, change what's going on. And actually, sometimes getting staff to understand that actually they're putting fuel on the fire. And so actually, the reason the person's aggressive or angry or upset is perfectly legitimate. And actually, if you're in the same position, you would equally be angry or aggressive. as well. So actually for me there's a bit of more complexity. Some of the words are just what was written or what we hear, but actually sometimes there's other stories behind that of actually people understanding of what that means, of actually taking away that label and taking away and seeing actually there's a person there and what is it that's going on for that person to make that person respond that way. Because we don't just suddenly become aggressive or difficult or angry or upset because we've got nothing better to do. There's usually something driving that. So I think the session OTD thing about mind my language would be amazing, because I think we're all frustrated by similar kinds of words. But then again, how do we move forward from that? So, really a list of do's and don'ts, and I'm sure we all do that in our day-to-day dealings with staff. I definitely challenge that quite a lot. But it's just still a slow process, I think.
Thanks, Lisa. I think, Michael, I'd like to just touch on the point you mentioned there, and it's a really good point. And this is not to insult any clinician, and but like we said there, as nurses, we're not the experts on dementia. The reality is, if we're working in aged care, we may probably do have the shortest interaction with the resident. We might be there to administer medication, assess pain. The longest time that would be with a resident or family member is a case conference with GP or doing something, or if there was an incident before, for example. But I think what I liked about your point is that often I can see aged care providers, I'm not speaking globally, and they'll say on their teams, "Oh, we've got Joe Bloggs, he's got 35 years of nursing experience." It's like, okay, that's excellent. We've all got X amount of years of experience, finished in 2010, it's like 14, 15 years experience. But how many evidence-based practice years of experience do I have? Because bet your bottom dollar that the things I learned at university back then are not relevant now. And I just told you about the example of how we classify patients, resident service users. So I think what I like about Open Doors 2030, and I haven't been to any sessions, but the fact that you leave your ego at the door, everyone's there to learn. It's not a silver bullet, but let's share. For example, there was a resident who was quite distressed. How would you approach them? This could be that sort of intervention that you can use. So I think it's about that sharing of knowledge. But for me, my opinion is that I think here in Australia, we're looking at dementia really wrong. And I think that it's a public health issue. And I think that we should look at it in that respect. So look at ways potentially how we can age well. We're getting older, and we all hope. I hope that when I get to the point of I need support, that my wife or children look after me. But the reality is, that might not be the case. Or children get married and have their own lives and different things. But we will need to have appropriate care, and you want to have the right care. So I think the way that we're looking and perceiving dementia here in Australia, I think it's wrong. I think it's a public health issue. We looked at ways that the actual causes of dementia, the causes of Alzheimer's disease, and if we could diet, it might be stresses, it might be exercise, but if we could actually work on that, I think if we had a preventative approach to it, in years to come, that would serve us well. Not sure your thoughts.
I think we definitely need all that research into prevention, potentially cure. But even if that happened tomorrow, we'd still have hundreds of thousands of people requiring dementia support as a result of their dementia. I think I liked your comment about nurses, and what I say sometimes is have you had 20 years of nursing experience, or have you had 1 year 20 times? Because there are a lot of nurses out there who are just practicing very much in the same way as when they did 20 years ago. So, and I've been guilty of that. Is when I first started in dementia education, I realized I had a big learning curve because things had moved on since I had trained. And it should, and it is, and that's what OTD is saying is, hey, you haven't had time you've missed stuff. Stuff is happening. One of our speakers was Dr. Alan Power, and he talks about, or has talked in the past about dementia as a disability, and providing, in the same way as someone who has a disability, we provide ramps to access services or whatever. We don't do that with dementia. So we need to provide cognitive ramps to overcome cognitive curbs. And I like that because it's not blaming dementia and saying, hey, you've got this thing now, which is kind of a problem, so let's hide it away and, keep you safe, keep you fed, keep you whatever until the inevitable happens. It's about looking at that person as still having strengths. We need to find or recognize the strengths and support those. It's not about doing care to people. And as you say, it's a complete 180 change in our mindset that we're not there in charge of the nurse in charge is not in charge of the residents, or shouldn't be in charge of the residents, telling them what to do and they fit into their routine. And it's very difficult. It's even more difficult when you're the nurse in charge and you're the only one for 150 people. To say that you're going to provide anything near person-centered support is clearly ludicrous. So there's a lot of things that we know are problems, but the organizations are just deluding themselves that it's too hard, it's very complicated. It's not that complicated. It's treat people like humans, provide support, environments that are individually appropriate to them, and give them support for what they can't do, but don't do stuff for them that they can do, and don't take away stuff that they can do from them. And that's what aged care has been. It's sit in the chair and we'll bring some bingo to you at 10 o'clock and 2:30 or whatever it is. And, your bedtime's 6:30. The standards have changed that. So you now have choice. You can have tea or coffee. You can have bedtime at 6:30 or 6:45. That doesn't float people's boats. That's not quality of life. That's not meaningful engagement. It comes, full circle with dignity of risk of, are we prepared? Do we genuinely want to have this vision, this journey by 2030, that dementia care can be completely, not just changed, but transformed? It's possible, but people have got to sign up to it. And we have 500 members of OTD now, so the word is out there, and as I say, we're egoless, willing to share any information, and people can take it and do what they like with it, and we hope they do.
Yeah, no, that's great. I was going to ask you in terms of the questions to you both, Michael, Lisa, biophilic design. Now, we know that obviously with aged care providers, sometimes space can be limited, and often there's more concrete than grass. And if there are grass areas, sometimes they can be hard to access. You need to utilize a swipe card or frog key. But your thoughts on the importance of biophilic design in aged care facilities?
I've seen some aspects of biophilic design. I think I've seen some very more tokenistic nods to it, I think. I haven't seen any in New Zealand so far that I think has truly embodied that. I think there's been nods to it and try to integrate that. I think there's still a lot of research around that at the moment. But we all know the benefits of nature. We all know the benefits of natural. I was talking to my son the other day, actually. We were walking, and we said we should all be walking on our grass bare feet, because we all know the benefits of, how therapeutic and beneficial that is. Yet we continually put artificial grass in lots of places because it's easy to maintain. I've advocated for real grass in lots of places because I'm like, somebody will push a mower. I can guarantee there'll be somebody there who would love to push a mower and collect the grass at the end of the day, and there's all the benefits and things. So I think I've seen some movements going on, I've seen some conversations going on, but I don't think I've seen any true evidence of biophilic. I mean, we don't often have real plants inside, do we? It's very rare you see a real plant because somebody has to water a plant. Correct. So if we never mind all the other things. I had a beautiful, somebody was telling me about a sensory room, I think somewhere in Europe, where it actually kind of breathes with you. Like this room, apparently it breathes with you, so it's quite organic in terms of how it is and how it engages with the elements. But I kind of think we're still struggling to even get some basic designs right, to be honest, never mind all the thing. But I did notice in Australia there's been quite a few movements around the design space. Michael, do you know any more about that?
I agree with you. There's been some movement. We all understand it. We all understand particularly the benefits of getting outside, but still residents don't get outside, even the ones that are able to mobilize themselves. The ones that can't, they don't go outside. I can't remember the research, but it's sort of said that the average age care resident spends 2 minutes a year outside, or something crazy like that. I think there have been design guidelines for many years, and I worked on a project with DTA developing a virtual reality meaningful spaces program with Richard Fleming, who is a very well-known person in this space, and there's lots of work that is out there. Again, there are guidelines, but people don't have to follow them. They're recommendations again, so people pick a little bit of it and pay lip service to it to an extent. In terms of biophilic, I don't know too much. There have been small scale attempts. The best place I've seen lately, I've just been traveling and I came through Changi Airport. That's a place where I think I could actually live in this place for a reasonable amount of time. It's really well done. So the technology's there. I'll just give a shout out to, there's a member of OTD called Monica Eastway, and she's an eco-gerontologist with something that's new to me. I'm very interested in it. And she would say that it's great to bring the outside in, and we should kind of do that, but it's more about getting out into the nature. So I work for an organization that one of their homes has fantastic gardens that are tended by contractors, and they look beautiful. Very few people actually go out into them. So I think there's an opportunity there for all residents, not just those with dementia, but we have to support them to be able to go out. Dignity of risk again. Are they allowed to go out on their own at midnight and, walk through the fountain or whatever it might be? But again, these are just questions that we know the answers. We know what the research tells us. But again, system problems and fear stop us from actually taking that leap and say, let's open the doors to the gardens, let alone to the dementia segregated units, as I'm now going to call them.
In New Zealand, there are some places, a lot of their facilities are on like internal courtyards. So there is some kind of nod, I guess, to engaging with outside. But I still think they are, I keep thinking about the beautiful prisons, they call them. People talk about actually, like living in the hotels. So places which look aesthetically beautiful and really nice, but people are not encouraged to touch. So I kind of think sometimes we're building these places, and gardens are very similar. I remember doing a survey at a place I worked in about the gardens, and they looked nice, but they weren't designed for people to engage with them. They were designed for people to look at them and go, oh, they're really nice. But they weren't there for people to go and put your hands in the soil and to get the tools and to start doing anything, or to pick some fruit off the trees. Or they were very much around passive process, passive kind of thing to look at that was nice, but actually not something that was meant to be engaged with, which I think is the difference as well. Is we do lovely landscapes, but the landscaper comes in Thames, but actually a space where people can actually engage themselves and get the benefits of all those kind of engaging with nature, which we know is so therapeutic, and so good when you get end of the day. And so that's really interesting.
Yeah, no, thank you, Lisa and Michael. I think with me, especially not really in because I worked mainly in mental health and not in aged care facilities, for example, private facilities apart from the family business, and it was like a home. You couldn't tell the difference. You walked down the street, and that's what you wanted, a home from home environment. And even when we were interviewing potential staff, the residents were there. And I remember one staff, when we started taking any questions, and she said, "Oh, I'll ask you a question outside." And she said, "Oh, just about my information." It wasn't left out the address and phone number and things, but they said, "Oh, why was the resident there in the interview?" So because we were working in their home. If you're successful, you'll be looking after them. So they have every right to be on the internet to see whether they were like someone like you looking after them. She went on to be a team leader, which was really good, but it was just that sort of change in that mindset. But the question I wanted to ask you is, and I've seen it a lot, and actually I've even got confused sort of going around different aged care facilities, but these fake painted, bookshelves on doors or nature. And I remember once where it was unfortunately a couple of lights out in one part of the corridor, and I was walking down a tour, and I got a bit just disorientated because you had this nature space, and I was like, "Oh, where's the exit?" Because the fire exit, the light wasn't illuminated. But yeah, your thoughts on this kind of painting random images. So yeah.
Yeah, like I've been guilty of using it. I think there is a place for murals or decals, individualizing with the residents as per they like, but bookcases, those sorts of things, I always caution against. Rodney, we were having a discussion about this very thing a few years ago, I think it was, and he said, how are we trying to confuse our residents further when people are appearing out of bookcases like Harry Potter? I don't like them. I don't think, and it's a broader thing about fakery, and that's come up again in discussions on LinkedIn recently about whether it's okay to fake the food that people are eating and things like that. I don't believe we should be normalizing things as much as possible. If put a bookcase there, I like the VR. The VR has a place. Going to different destinations by VR is perfectly a good thing to do as an adjunct, but it doesn't, wherever possible, provide the real thing, or as near to the real thing as possible. And the question is, why can't you do it? Again, dignity of risk. Why can't you go to the football match? Why can't you, go here in Adelaide? One of our homes is very near the beach. Can the residents go and have a walk on the beach? Why not? If the question, it should be those 5 whys. Why not? Okay, it's because of so and so, and usually it comes down to staffing levels. So it's a false reason not to do something, and you can't claim that badge of person-centered support if you're making decisions based on we haven't got enough staff or the right staff. That's a choice. So I don't believe in fake. I don't particularly like doll therapy, although some people love it, and it works in some circumstances, I'm sure. But there's for any therapies that they call, I hate that word as well. There'll be a big meeting when we talk about language. I think we'll have to have 2 or 3 hours, I think. But interact with real babies if you can. Interact with real animals. Have pets in the home. But of course, there's always a dignity of risk or a systems reason. Oh, who's going to clean up after the dog? Oh, what if the dog bites? All those questions. We'll work through those questions. But sometimes you can't provide everything, of course. But fake stuff is fake stuff. It's second best at best. So I'm not in favour of that sort of thing.
Yeah, the murals is quite interesting. I did quite a big research thing last year and contacted quite a lot of experts actually in the field because I was working for an organisation and we were talking about murals. They had murals, which were very, just what they were and what they looked like and how they could be interpreted was more the conversation. And around how, if you're going to have them, actually, what would you have and what would they look like? But then also kind of going into a bit of conflict. So this is somebody's home. So if this is my home, I don't know about you. You might have murals. I don't have murals in my house. I just have like pictures and photos on my walls of, things I like or things that have got meaning or things I enjoy looking at. So actually for me, there's a lot of conversations around any kind of what we put on walls in general. And I think also about looking to think about the purpose. So as a deterrent, ironically, if you put a bookshelf as a deterrent, I read, so I would be going towards the bookshelf. So you wouldn't be stopping me. You'd just be, like you're saying, people would just be coming through the bookshelf and it'd be very weird. So actually for me, it's much better to use colour. So actually, if we want to hide stuff, I would say just paint it all the same colour as the walls and highlight the things you want to do and actually have things that people have got a reason to stay and a reason to engage with. Like Michael said, have a bookshelf with books, radical, and then for me, is actually we're going to have artwork. I'm a great believer in nameability and saliency theory around artwork. So actually we have it on the wall and it's kind of got something so you can name it. So I can say to Michael, hey, your room's, Now, if you go past the boat on your left-hand side, the blue boat on your left-hand side, your room's just around the corner. And actually also conversational starters. So actually have things that have got some meaning and purpose to add value, I guess, rather than, and if you want to just disguise areas because you want to deter people, it's a cleaning cupboard and we don't want everybody going in the cleaning cupboard, then we just do something with that. But near to that, there might be something really interesting. It might be really visually appealing that actually people are more likely going to go to. So it's around how you use, I'm not really a fan of murals or any kind of fakery because I don't really see the need. And it's also not a home. If this is where I live, this is not what I have in my house. I have real things that I do real things with. So there's kind of lots of layers around the murals on the walls.
That's right. Thanks, Mike. I think it's interesting. What providers are doing. I can remember one instance when I was a facility manager here in Australia, and in your sort of management, you either hear from relatives when they're really happy or really upset, and had this complaint came across my desk, and it was something like, Mark, they use the words, we're outraged with the activity that mum had yesterday. And there was like this chain of escalation when I was working, so you have to escalate towards you, depending on the words that we used. It was a little matrix, but I didn't have to because I sort of managed to speak to and find out what was wrong, and I was quite new to this concept in this activities part and lifestyle. So it was the first time that in my life I saw this this seal-like animal where residents were supposed to pet, and the first thing that came to my mind is, what on earth? Like, even as kids, you pet a dog, you might pet a horse, or you don't pet a seal. That's ridiculous, That's and then we're making, I guess, trying to enforce, residents that have a cognitive impairment, have dementia, to pet the seal. So rightfully, the daughter was upset, and then her question was, whose idea was this? Well, unfortunately, because of that provider that was there. That's what they were doing. And when I tried to reach out to my regional manager, and again, linking back to when I was talking to you about candidates and where they stay and having short stays in their career, sometimes providers need to understand, again, it's not rocket science. When a family member would bring their dog in and it wasn't someone else's dog, the dog naturally, animals can sort of feel that sort of thing, but they would go to people, and the residents loved it. Just stroking a dog, or smelling the real fur, or having someone there on their clothes, and seeing that and being in touch with nature and that environment. So I think often, for what reason we're doing it, we overcomplicate things. And even in our notes, though, and a lot of pickups, even for me as a clinician, to be honest, I think the most dangerous aspect of any clinician's practice is when we think we know it all. And that's when I believe we know nothing. So even pickups from today, Michael, is in terms of language, I think sometimes we over-formalize it. I know as Brits we can be quite formal in our language, but I think just in terms of over-formalizing things, just what happened, write it down. And even in terms of, like you mentioned about pet therapy, and Mike, you mentioned about it's too difficult to do, care plans, who's going to clean up, who's going to do this, or what happens if bite someone. So we tend to move away. It's a very risk averse. Let's create the most risk-free environment, which is not the best. But I'm just keen to hear in terms of future developments, both in the doors 2030 in terms of what you're doing, and it's this global sharing of knowledge, which I think is going to improve. As clinicians, we lean upon that. We all have our friends, our sounding boards who we run something by, and if a bad day at work, we try and unpack it. But I think it's fantastic to hear, because when I first heard about the initiative, there was only about 200 members, and Mike, I think there's about 500 now. So it's gone twofold, which is great to hear. And I think in terms of where we're up to now, I definitely think we can do things better. And I wanted to sort of finish this podcast episode mindful of time with a few more questions. And what I wanted to ask you is your thoughts on how we can do things better as clinicians working within an aged care setting, in the respect that with families, they're often upset because they always say, "Oh, mum was like this," or "She used to do this." But we sort of know the resident for how they are, and even though they have dementia or cognitive impairment, they have these unique sort of things they do which the staff love and care for them. So it's that kind of who they were versus how they are now. What can we do in terms of bringing the two together? There seems to be that emotional aspect of families wanting their mum to be how they were and to remember and do things. But how can you sort of, in a way, bring those two together to provide that support, I guess, to families as well as to the resident?
Yeah, I was going to say, to me, again, it's a gap that we have. And when I was back in critical care, it's a similar gap. Is like, what do you explain during, let's say, a cardiac arrest? It's a difficult time to actually involve people. But there was, I don't know what they do now, but there was a movement at the time to actually bring people into the situation so they could see the reality of what's happening and obviously have someone explain what's going on. I think especially though, what commonly happens, I'm sure you've seen it in aged care, because you have a close relationship with family and partners and loved ones over possibly quite a long period of time. And sometimes mistakes happen, of course, that's natural. But often what happens is when there's a problem and someone's making complaints, especially if they become formal complaints, is the team, the people back away and go, "Oh, here comes Mark. Oh, he's always, he's not going to be happy." And it can go two ways. But I think what you touched on, which was an interesting thing, is not only do we not listen to people living with dementia and what they would want, but we don't tend to educate the families very much. We don't, again, it's a very much like you going to visit your loved one in hospital and you don't really ask a lot of questions, and it's that paternalistic, well, they're in charge. And I think, again, it's their home as well, or they're visiting their loved one's home. What do they understand about? What's their understanding of dementia? What's so it's not surprising there are misconceptions, and there's that gap of, you're not actually, like we said before, we're actually not doing everything for your mum because that would be a bad thing because of whatever. We don't have those, maybe again, time constraints. We don't have the time to sit down enough until it becomes an official complaint, and then it becomes a case conference or something like that. So I think there's an opportunity to involve the informal carers and the loved ones, and to ask them the questions before the person came into aged care. What were you doing? What worked well for you, and what didn't work well for you? And maybe we can work together and involve people in their own care a lot more, rather than, again, that we're going to take over the care and we're going to do care to your loved one.
Very well said, Mike. I think it really comes down to, I think, we tend to overcomplicate things, and I remember, well, I can just recall, it's just very regimented. We don't even, when it comes down to nutrition and hydration, we sometimes stick 3 meals, massive plates in front of people, but we haven't even looked, like you said, done the right assessments. They may have been grazers. They may have been quite finicky eaters, where they just pick and graze throughout the day. But we put these 3 big plates in front of them, and they're not used to it. So I definitely think, and that's why I'm really fond, I'll be a bit biased, but towards the community Homes Australia model, because that is care. And again, like we do in the UK, you can provide personalised care to 5 residents. You can't to 80 to 100. And that's where the disconnect is. The Royal Commission says, let's do, for example, they talk about household models and doing certain things. But at the end of the day, you can't provide person-centered care to 80 residents. It's ironic that Standard 1 consumer dignity choice is centered around the consumer. It's ironic because we can't do it. And it's disrespectful to sell the dream to families that they're going to have this, Rolls Royce experience when they're not. I've worked for providers in some parts of the eastern suburbs of Sydney. The average house price is 14, 15 million, and the level of care they're receiving, it's not right, it's inappropriate. Um, I can recall one instance where I added an extra staff member to the roster, but back then there was a sort of chain of command. As a facility manager in aged care, you're just a pawn piece at times in terms of your hierarchy and what you can do. And I was called for a meeting. There was a regional manager, ops manager there, and they said to me, "Mark, you've been here a short time. Who gave you permission to approve another staff member overnight in the evening?" And maybe you can call me, true grit, when it's paid is paid. But I just said, look, I don't like to waste my time with that of others. Just want to share with you the Corbell Times for the last 2 weeks in the evening. And there was just silence. And I said, and to answer that question on who approved the extra pregnant person, my conscience. And there was a pin drop silence. So thank you very much, Mark. Regional manager goes, that was a bit brave of you. Didn't hear anything. They allowed that staff member for the next fortnight, and then they pushed another admission that was inappropriate for the home, but just so there was commerce in their head. But again, it comes down to having the right people looking after elderly people. I think we really need to change the way that we're doing things, and it's fantastic to hear this initiative is there, it's in place. You're having guest speakers from all around the world, and the sharing of knowledge. Basically, from New Zealand, I know you're all originally from the UK, but just the sharing of knowledge. That's how we're going to get better. I think we can all agree there is no silver bullet, but just hearing what we can do to build these pictures and take what you need, like you said, Michael. Like it might not be a one-stop shop in terms of every scenario for everyone, but there are parts of it that will work. There'll be parts of members there that think that's great, we'll use that or we won't use that. But if we don't share that knowledge with people within, like some providers here, and they won't share knowledge, we're going to be in the same place, and ultimately the residents, I guess, are going to lose out. And so I guess lastly, I just wanted to ask, do you think, quality and compliance, there's always those two sort of things there. Do you think, Michael, Lisa, they can ever be intertwined? Or do you think they're always going to be at loggerheads in aged care settings?
It's a big bugbear of mine, as I mentioned before. I think there needs to be compliance. We've always had governance and compliance. I think it's gone too far, and I think many organisations, I can't say most or all, but many organisations, because of that fear, because they've been hit by unmets by the Commission, they've knee-jerk reacted and put more and more layers of compliance in. Compliance drags the quality down. And with all due respect to those many people I know, colleagues who are in compliance and love it and love audit and all the rest of it, it has to be done. It's an important element of governance, of quality, overall quality. But we've got away from, so we're continuing to do those outdated things, and things like now we're looking at best practices, dementia villages. We're going to put, we're going to make the environment a little bit nicer, but we're still going to herd people together in one place and provide the same support and say it's best practice. It's not best practice. It was once, but it's not now. But these homes are now being built as if they're the future. They're not the future. So OTD, I think, can help, have that conversation. And in my context, so I work for an organisation that is its values are bold, genuine, and kind, and it wants to be bold. It's not just in the aged care sector; it's in many, many different sectors. And the opportunity is they are going to look at rebuilding one of their homes and look at a multi-generational model, which I think is bold, is innovative. And if I'm asked my input and OTD is asked to have its own input, I would be pushing for, well, this is an opportunity to say, let's not have on the second floor an aged care wing. Let's have people with dementia living within that community. Let the community, like the outside community, come in. So it's not fenced off from the community, it's part of the community. And so the doors are open outwards, but they're also allowing people to come inside and see what's happening. And it's a community. So like I'm in a street where there's a lady with dementia 2 or 3 houses down, there's a guy with mental health issues across the road receiving support. My elderly neighbour is having wound care from a provider 2 times a week. That's fine. This is a community environment, but we're not putting everyone with wound care in one part of the community, and we shouldn't be putting people with dementia or disability or mental health together just because it's easier to manage it that way. So I think there's an opportunity to open the doors literally and open our minds to going back to community, real communities. We've lost community. That's a whole nother discussion. And I've been in Asia for the last 3 months, and the way community is there and looking after not only your family, but your extended family and neighbours is much different to what we do in Australia and the UK and around the Western world. And while we're not going to jump to that in the next probably 6 years, we can start thinking about what does good really look like, and instead of just tinkering with putting murals on walls and maybe opening 1 or 2 doors and maybe whatever, we can look at what do we want dementia support to look like in 2030 and 2050 and start moving there today, because we have the knowledge to do it and we have the people who are passionate. Not just the founders of OTD, but everyone involved in OTD is volunteering their time and their knowledge free of charge, with no ego, with no sort of agenda. We just want things to be better for our seniors and for those of us who will be in aged care or being looked after at home in the next years.
Thanks, Michael. Very eloquently said. Lisa, your views on that sort of
I think very similar to Michael's. I was just kind of thinking we've touched on quite a few things, and we talked about engaging with animals. We've talked about engaging with real babies instead of dolls. And now there's the greenhouse project, is it, in the US? So basically build houses in the middle of just everyday neighborhoods and everyday streets. And I know I saw a place in the UK that built on the high street. They've got a cafe, and people on the high street, before they catch their bus home, come into the cafe, and the people, the with dementia there, and everybody just is in that intergenerational living. It's quite an interesting kind of approach, isn't it? Because that's everyday normal living. I guess that's the same. And we know that the nuclear family doesn't exist as much now, or the extended family even. So actually, our neighbours are our family often, or the people we go to see at the local shop are our family or our contacts and our support. So, but we tend to then still build communities for older people away. We still tend to be very much, we disconnect them from a whole community, and we make them a community unto themselves rather than trying to integrate people into the community that they're in. So apparently there's a place in Auckland, somebody was telling me the other day, which is going to be part kind of, I don't know, it's rest home or for supported living or something, but half from residential as well. So an apartment block. I was curious around that because, like Michael said, it's that which we've seen in the Europe, hasn't it? That's been going on in Europe. So I think there's lots of scope to do things differently, I guess. So that's what we keep saying, is we know there's scope and we know there's great things happening, yet we keep replicating the same model. And what does that mean? So I guess there's lots of interesting space moving forward.
I was just going to say, we had a speaker called Dolph Becks at one of our OTD meetings, and he is an educator for something called the Burn Method, which is really exciting and interesting. And he has, in Holland, in the Netherlands, they have care farms. And I think there's an opportunity, again, talking about your biophilic design or your eco-gerontology. There's a big opportunity in Australia, in lots of places, but in Australia, you'll know, Mark, that it's in regional towns are dying, farming towns are dying, and then not only is the economy dying, but the old elderly population is having to come into the cities to access care. Well, if we can provide care farms and communities to have multi-generational living out in, the regional rural towns of Australia, that's a double win.
That's right. Very well said, Michael. Annalise, I think, in terms of respectfully, we've talked about this a lot, and I've thoroughly enjoyed this podcast in terms of the knowledge that's been shared, the topics that have been discussed. But I think in terms of, we talked about this, that we ultimately want to try and allow people to stay in their house, stay in their homes. And I think, obviously aged care is the last resort whereby if it's not possible, you get a home modification to have a home care package, or even if you have the capacity to have a registered nurse here, and they'll come to a point that if you can't do that, kudos and credit to people who can do that. But if you have to go into a setting, it shouldn't feel institutionalized. It should not feel like, like you've seen in some documentaries when people say, I'm just here to die, or they lose their sense of identity or purpose, or we exacerbate their existing illness by putting random bureaus that have no sense to orientate them into the environment. So I think, and especially in rural communities, and Mikey just mentioned there's a lot of providers, and I had an episode that I did earlier today with Mark Sewell, the previous CEO of Warrigal, and we talked about this, and you need to support those communities that have a standalone provider, because like you just mentioned there, Michael, if, for example, someone's wife or someone's husband's in an aged care facility and it's a 5-minute trip for them to get there, if you then that closes down about a couple of hours away, they won't be able to go there. They lose that sense of connection, that sense of purpose, that sense of reality. So I think supporting those providers in rural areas is much needed in Australia. I'm sure it is in different parts of the world, where there's remote access to care and healthcare services. I think there's been a lot of real valuable insight shared from both yourself, Michael, and Lisa. So I wanted to say thank you for your time. But I wanted to leave our viewers with, if they do want to find out more information on OCD 2030, or how they can potentially join, if there's a qualification process, how can they do so?
Well, excitingly, we have a website that's just about to go live. I can give you, it's not yet live, but I can give you the URL, which is www.openthedoors.au. So that will probably be the best landing point. Or if you're on LinkedIn, look at hashtag OTD2030. And there's or contact any one of us, any one of the founders, and we can send you the subscription. It's a very easy click on a subscription form, and you'll get the newsletters, which are excellent after every Keys to the Doors and after every main meeting. But look out for that website soon.
Fantastic. Thanks, Michael. And Lisa, I'd just like to thank you for your time. I said good morning at the start of the call, but it's the afternoon in New Zealand, so thank you for joining us from New Zealand. And I think it's just fantastic that there is this sharing of wealth of knowledge globally. I think, as clinicians, we want to improve as providers, and as a sector, we're richer for more information and the wealth of knowledge that's shared. So thank you for your time as well.
Thank you. Thank you for the interesting questions. It's been an interesting debate. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thanks, Michael. Lisa. Take care.